Welcome to the dark side of true stories, where every whisper hides a secret and every silence has a scream. Subscribe now because here, the fear is real, and you never know who's listening. I moved to the outskirts of Santa Fe in the summer of 2015. The land was raw and untamed, a blend of high desert scrub and jagged mountains that seemed to stretch on forever. The kind of place that felt both liberating and oppressive at once. I had just ended a long relationship, and the move was my attempt at a fresh start. A new life away from the bitter winters of the Northeast. It wasn't exactly a dream, it was more of a necessity. But New Mexico, with its promise of wide open spaces and endless skies, felt like a place where I could lose myself. I started working as a freelance photographer, taking portraits for tourists, and spending my days exploring the arid beauty of the desert. The quiet solitude was healing. But something about the place unsettled me. I'd heard the local legends about strange happenings in the desert, stories passed down from generations. The old-timers talked about spirits, shapeshifters, and things that wear faces that aren't theirs. It sounded like folklore until I encountered it myself. My apartment sat at the edge of a small neighborhood that bled into the wilderness. There were no streetlights out here, just the pale glow of stars that seemed to hover close to the earth. Most evenings, I would drive out into the desert to photograph the landscape or maybe catch a glimpse of a coyote or a rattlesnake. It was during one of these excursions that I first heard the stories that would change everything. I had pulled off the highway and parked near a dried creek bed, setting up my tripod and camera to capture the sunset. The desert, in all its infinite shades of orange and purple, was breathtaking, but there was a heaviness in the air. The kind of quiet that feels like it's hiding something. That's when I noticed the man standing at the far edge of the dirt road. He was tall and thin, dressed in dark clothing that blended into the landscape. His face was obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat, but I could see his eyes pale, almost translucent. I stared at him for a moment, my pulse quickening. There was something wrong about the way he stood, as if he was waiting for something. I tried to shake off the feeling of being watched and focused on my camera, but my eyes kept drifting back to him. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone, swallowed by the desert. I couldn't explain it, but the feeling of unease lingered long after he disappeared. That night I stayed up late editing photos. The sound of the desert wind howling against my windows was strangely comforting. But when I went to bed, I couldn't shake the image of that man. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just another strange sighting in a place full of oddities. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The following week, the stories started to trickle in. A woman at the local coffee shop spoke of a friend who had found her cat skinned in the yard, the flesh expertly removed, but the skin left behind as if someone had taken it and worn it like a coat. It sounded insane until it happened again and again. The victims weren't just animals anymore. The next reports came from farmers who found their livestock mutilated, the skin carefully removed and the meat untouched. The stories spread like wildfire. People were terrified, whispering about a skin stealer, a creature that took the skins of its victims and wore them as a disguise. The more I heard, the more I began to wonder if I'd seen the skin stealer myself. The man I had seen in the desert, his pale eyes watching me from the shadows, suddenly seemed less like a figment of my imagination and more like the thing the locals were whispering about. But no one ever spoke about it directly, not in the open. It was as if acknowledging the creature would give it power. As the weeks passed, the atmosphere around Santa Fe grew heavier. People began to avoid the outskirts, staying within the safety of the city limits after dark. The desert, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a place where something ancient and malevolent lurked. It wasn't here until I received an unexpected call that I fully understood the horror I had stumbled into. It was the middle of the night when my phone rang. It was a woman named Rosa who I had met at a local bar weeks earlier. She had been the first to tell me about the skin stealer, but I thought it was just another one of those local legends people love to share. Her voice was trembling when she spoke. It was late November when I first moved to the small town of Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. The name itself had always intrigued me, but it was the town's eerie isolation that lured me in. Nestled between the harsh desert and the jagged mountains, it was a place where time seemed to slow down. The quiet was overwhelming, broken only by the occasional gust of wind and the distant cry of coyotes. I didn't mind it though. After years of living in the chaos of city life, I welcomed the silence. I had come for a fresh start. The heartbreak from a failed marriage had left me broken, and I needed space to heal. So, I rented a small, crumbling house on the edge of town, where the desert met the foot of the mountains. The realtor told me the house had a charming history, but I was too focused on the idea of escaping the past to care about its stories. At first, it was just like any other new place. I spent the days unpacking and setting up my life again. The nights, however, felt different. There was something about the darkness in the desert that felt oppressive. It wasn't the typical darkness, the kind that you can ignore or sleep through. No, this was a silence that clung to you, like a weight. And that weight seemed to grow heavier each night. It wasn't until I met Maria that I began to understand the true nature of this place. Maria worked at the local diner, and she was the first to speak to me in the weeks I'd lived there. Her eyes were sharp, watching me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. At first, I thought it was just because I was new to town, but there was something else behind her gaze, something unspoken. One evening, after a quiet dinner, she lingered at my table as I sipped my coffee. "You're not from around here," she said. It wasn't a question, but a statement. "No," I replied. "I'm just here for a little while. New start." She nodded, a somber look crossing her face. "You should be careful around here. Some things aren't meant to be messed with." I frowned, unsure of what she meant. "What do you mean?" Maria hesitated before speaking again, lowering her voice so no one could overhear. "There are things out in the desert, things that wear the faces of people." She looked around, as if checking for any eavesdroppers. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you, but I've seen them. You might already have too." Her words hung in the air like a threat. I didn't know what to make of it, so I smiled politely and excused myself. But later that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The days passed, and I continued to ignore the strange warnings Maria had given me. But as time went on, I began to notice strange things happening around me. I'd come home to find doors unlocked that I was certain I had locked, or furniture shifted just slightly from its place. But the most disturbing was the way I would catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eyeshadows that seemed to move when no one was around. One night, after finishing a late shift at the diner, Maria approached me again. This time her face was drawn with fear. "You don't understand, do you?" she asked. "It's not just the desert. It's here too. It follows people." "What are you talking about?" I asked, feeling a knot form in my stomach. "The skin stealer," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It wears people's faces, but it's not them. It's something else, something ancient. It's been around for as long as anyone can remember, and it's hunting again." I laughed nervously, unsure whether she was joking or serious, but the look in her eyes told me she wasn't playing. "Maria, you're scaring me." She didn't back down. "You'll understand soon enough. If you see it, don't speak to it. Don't let it get too close." That night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt alive with a presence that made my skin crawl. The wind howled outside, but it wasn't just the wind. There was something else, something that whispered my name. I tried to ignore it, but the whispers grew louder. Then, there was a knock on the door. At first I thought it was just the wind, or perhaps my imagination, but then, it knocked again. 3 sharp raps, followed by silence. I hesitated. Who could be out there at this time of night? I opened the door cautiously. Standing on my porch was a man, tall and gaunt, with dark eyes that seemed to pierce through me. He wore an old jacket, one that looked out of place in the modern world, and his face was covered in a patchy beard. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said, his voice deep but raspy, "but I'm lost. Can you help me?" There was something off about his voice, like it was too smooth. It didn't sound human, but I couldn't place why. And his eyes, those eyes, they looked like they had seen things no one should ever have to. I felt my heart race. My mind screamed at me to shut the door, to not let him in. But I didn't move. Instead, I stood there, frozen. He smiled then, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I've been walking for miles," he said, taking a slow step forward. "I think I'm close to home. Could I just come inside for a moment?" His hand reached out, and that's when I saw the skin around his fingertips was stretched too tightly, as if it wasn't his own. The texture of the skin was wrong, like something that had been forcibly pulled over bones. I slammed the door shut, my heart pounding in my chest. I pressed my back against the door, trying to catch my breath. But then the whispers came again, louder now, scratching at my mind. "Let me in," the voice hissed. But it wasn't his voice anymore. It was a blend of voices, all layered together, like someone was speaking through him. "Let me in, let me in." I ran to the window and peered out. The man was still there, but now he was staring directly at me, his eyes wide and unnatural, black as coal. I had to leave. I grabbed my keys and ran out of the house, not stopping to think. I didn't care where I was going, I just needed to get away from that thing, from the desert, from the skin stealer. But when I turned the corner, I froze. Standing in the road ahead of me was a woman, her hair tangled and her face pale. She wore a dress that seemed too old, as if it belonged to another time. Her eyes, black as night, locked onto mine. "Please," she whispered. "You don't have to run. I'm just trying to get home." And I realized then, with sickening clarity, that the man, the woman, the voices, they were all the same. The skin stealer had found me, and it wasn't going to let me go. I turned and ran, but as I glanced back, I could see the figure moving, shifting, growing closer. It wasn't a person, it was something far older, something that wore faces like masks, something that could never be stopped. The last thing I remember before the darkness took me was the feeling of cold hands closing around my throat, and a voice, muffled but clear, saying, "You're mine now." The dry heat of New Mexico's desert has a way of making the world feel small, not in the way a city shrinks under its tall buildings, but in a way that wraps you in silence. My name's Ella, and I've spent most of my life running away from one place or another. After the death of my mother, I found myself searching for a fresh start, truth or consequences. New Mexico seemed to offer that small, sleepy, and tucked far enough away from my old life to be forgotten. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I settled into an old adobe house on the outskirts of town, just before the land started to open up into the harsh expanse of desert. The house was cheap, but the realtor warned me it came with a history. "Strange things happen out here," she had said, her tone wavering between concern and amusement. "Just don't go poking around the desert too much. Some places out there are better left alone." Of course, I didn't listen. I was far too eager to start anew to care about such warnings. The first few weeks were peaceful, or at least I thought they were. I spent my days painting and taking walks in the desert, camera in hand, capturing the beauty of the dry landscape. But at night, things felt off. The desert winds would pick up, rattling the windows of my house, and I would often wake in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps just outside my door. At first I told myself it was the wind, or maybe an animal. The isolation out there played tricks on the mind. Then came the whispers. It was subtle at first, just a faint rustling sound that felt like someone was standing just outside, talking in low voices. The strange thing was, the whispers didn't sound like words. They were distorted, as if a dozen voices were layered on top of each other, all trying to speak at once. It wasn't human. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, willing myself not to listen, but the sound would continue. The night I decided to investigate changed everything. It had been an unusually hot evening, and I couldn't sleep. The air was thick, pressing in through the cracks of my window. I heard the whispers again, more insistent this time, swirling around my mind. Something pushed me to stand. I grabbed a flashlight and made my way outside, my feet dragging through the dust. The desert stretched out before me, and the shadows of the cacti seemed to stretch endlessly. The light from my flashlight barely cut through the darkness. I walked further from the house, feeling drawn by the whispers. They tugged at the back of my mind, growing louder with each step. I was nearly a mile from the house when I noticed a figure, standing in the distance, half hidden by the dark shape of a mesquite tree. The way it stood was wrong, its posture too stiff, too deliberate. It wasn't moving, but I could feel its eyes on me, even though I couldn't see its face. I froze, unsure of what to do. My mind screamed at me to turn around, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. I could hear my heart thumping in my chest, the only sound in the vast expanse of desert silence. "Who's there?" I called, my voice shaky in the quiet. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it stepped forward, its movements jerky, as if it wasn't quite sure how to walk. I could feel it drawing closer, and I couldn't stop watching it. As it stepped into the beam of my flashlight, I saw it more clearly. Its skin was stretched tight over a thin frame, as though it had been worn for too long, its features pale and hollow. But the worst part was, its eyes dark, empty holes where the light of my flashlight should have reflected. The thing had no pupils, no irises, just an endless, soulless black. It opened its mouth, and I felt my stomach churn as its lips peeled back in a grotesque imitation of a smile. Then, in a voice that sounded like 100 different people speaking over each other, it whispered, "You shouldn't have come here." Panic surged through me. Without thinking, I turned and ran, stumbling through the desert as the whispers followed me. It was faster than I was. Every time I looked back, it was closer, though it never seemed to move in any recognizable way. The whispers, though, grew louder. More voices joined in, their words becoming clearer. "You're not welcome," they chanted. "This land is ours." I barely made it back to the house before I collapsed on the porch. The desert seemed still again, as if nothing had ever happened. but I could still feel the weight of those eyes on me, burning into my back. That night, I barely slept. The whispers hadn't stopped, though they were softer now, like they were lingering just out of reach. My mind was racing, trying to process what had happened. I thought about Maria, the local woman who ran the diner who had warned me about the desert. Could this be what she meant? Was it the skin stealer she had mentioned in passing one night, in that voice full of dread? The next morning, I called Maria. Her voice was low, and there was an edge to it I hadn't heard before. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked, as if she had known all along. "I don't know what I saw. It wasn't human," I replied, my throat tight with fear. Maria sighed heavily. "It's a skin stealer, Ella, a creature that wears the skin of the dead. It's been out there for as long as anyone can remember. It wears the faces of those who've gone missing in the desert, and it lures people in with its whispers. It's not just a creature, it's a curse. You can't outrun it. It knows your name. It knows your fear." I felt the weight of her words, sinking in like a stone in my gut. "How do I stop it?" "You don't," Maria said softly. "The desert takes what it wants, and once it's marked you, it doesn't let go. It's part of the land, and it's been here long before any of us." The conversation ended with the hollow ringing of a dial tone, and I was left alone with the truth. I wasn't safe. The skin stealer had claimed me, and there was nowhere I could run. That night, the whispers came again, louder this time, filling my head with an unbearable pressure. They were calling my name, demanding I come outside. I knew then that I couldn't ignore them anymore. I didn't want to go back out there, but as the whispers grew louder, I knew I had no choice. Something about it was pulling me, dragging me toward the desert once again. I stepped outside, but this time there was no figure waiting for me. No distorted face, no hollow eyes. Instead, the desert was completely still, empty, silent, and then, I saw the faces. They were everywhere, just beneath the surface of the sand, eyes staring back at me from the dirt. Faces I recognized. My mother's, my father's, and others, people I had never seen before, their eyes wide with terror, trapped in the earth. The skin stealer had been here long before me, and now, it was claiming me too. It was the quiet that got to me first. I never expected it to be so loud. When I moved to Santa Fe to escape my past, I thought the peace of the desert would be a bomb. But what I didn't account for was the way the land seemed to inhale and exhale with the wind. The stillness pressing in, suffocating me when I was alone. It was like the land itself was watching, waiting. I had rented a small adobe house at the edge of town, a place where the desert met the mountains. It was perfect for the fresh start I needed. Away from my family, away from the constant buzz of city life, away from the reminders of my broken marriage. The house itself was quaint, but there was an undercurrent to it, something I couldn't explain. The creaking of the old wood at night, the cold drafts that cut through the walls, the unsettling feeling that someone was always just out of sight. It was in the early spring when the real trouble began. At first, it was just the strange sights, dead animals, skinned with surgical precision, left in odd formations in the desert. One evening after a hike, I saw the first of them, an old rabbit, its fur neatly folded to the side, like someone had done it on purpose. The clean skin hung like a grotesque display, as if it had been meticulously removed by some unseen hand. I thought little of it at first, perhaps a coyote or some other scavenger. The desert is full of strange happenings, but the next morning I found another coyote, its fur peeled away, and arranged next to its exposed flesh, as though it had been carefully undressed. I should have left it alone, but something compelled me to look closer. That's when I noticed the absence of tracks, the absence of blood. The skin had been removed with expert precision. I started hearing rumors around town, stories shared in hushed tones. People were scared. No one seemed to have a clear explanation, but the town was talking. They called it a skin stealer, a creature that took the skins of animals, and in some cases, humans, leaving behind only empty husks. Old-timers spoke of it like a ghost story, but their faces were grim when they mentioned it, eyes darting nervously. I tried to ignore it, dismissing it as superstition. But the more I heard, the more something gnawed at the back of my mind. I knew I was being watched, but it was never by anyone I could see. It was the feeling of eyes on me, something lurking just beyond the reach of my vision. It followed me through the days, through the thick desert heat, and into the lonely nights. Then one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky with hues of red and orange, I decided to go for a walk. The air was cool, a stark contrast to the brutal heat of the day. I didn't know what I was looking for, maybe some kind of peace, but I felt a pull, something inside me driving me to venture further into the desert. I walked 4 miles, the soft crunch of my boots against the dry earth the only sound breaking the stillness. And then, I saw it. A figure standing by a cluster of juniper trees in the distance. At first, I thought it was just another desert wanderer, maybe a hiker or someone lost in the desert. But something about it felt wrong. The figure was too still, like a statue, and there was something off about the way it stood, its arms hanging unnaturally by its sides. I felt my heart race. There was no wind, no movement, just the figure, standing in the fading light, its back to me. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to sound confident. The figure didn't move, not even a twitch. I took a step forward, then another, each one feeling heavier than the last. My feet seemed to move of their own accord, pulled by some invisible force. As I got closer, the thing turned slowly. At first I thought it was a tall man, dressed in tattered clothes, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. But as it turned fully to face me, I saw something that froze me in place. Its skin was stretched too tight, its features not quite human, but more like a mask. The skin was wrong pale and sickly, like it had been sewn together from different pieces, mismatched and stitched haphazardly. But the worst part was its eyes. They were not the eyes of a person, they were black, empty voids, the pupils nothing more than dark pits. And then, it smiled a slow, jagged smile, as though its face didn't know how to form the expression properly. "Please," it rasped, its voice a chorus of whispers. "Come closer." I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I stood there, rooted to the spot, watching it move toward me. Its steps were slow, deliberate, but somehow wrong. The figure moved like it was remembering how to walk, its limbs jerking and twitching with every step. The smell hit me, then a rancid, decaying odor like something that had been dead for too long, buried in the earth, and pulled back to life. It was overwhelming, like the stench of rot that seeped into your bones and made you gag. "No," I whispered to myself, a cold wave of terror washing over me. But I couldn't stop myself. My legs moved before I could think, and I found myself backing away, my body moving faster than my mind could process. I turned and ran, my breath ragged in my chest, the sound of my heartbeat thundering in my ears. The whispers followed, surrounding me, growing louder as I fled. They were all around me now, voices that sounded like my own, my mother's, my father's, all calling my name, begging me to come back. I didn't stop until I reached my house, slamming the door behind me and bolting it shut. I pressed my back against the door, my breath coming in short gasps, my hands trembling. I didn't know what I had seen, but I knew one thing for sure: it was real. The skin stealer wasn't just a story, it was out there, and it was hunting. The next day I tried to leave. I packed what I could, ready to leave Santa Fe behind. But when I went to start my car, I froze. In the dirt by the driver's side door were deep, fresh footprints that led nowhere, but they were unmistakable. The figure had been here, too. I ran back into the house, locking the doors and windows, the fear clawing at my insides. It knew where I was. It knew me. I never left the house again. The whispers still come, and sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still see those black, empty eyes staring at me from the dark corners of my mind. The desert had claimed me, and it wasn't going to let go. No one ever found me, no one ever came to check on me. And maybe that was the worst part of it all. Because when the desert takes you, it doesn't just take your body, it takes your soul, piece by piece, until you are nothing but a shadow, a whisper, a skin, just another face it can wear. The desert has a way of consuming everything, even memories. My name's Jace, and I moved to New Mexico in the dead of winter, escaping the frozen streets of Chicago for the arid warmth of the Southwest. I didn't plan on staying long. I told myself it was just a short-term retreat, a few months to recalibrate, clear my head. But New Mexico has a way of getting under your skin, and before long, I had settled into a small adobe house in a forgotten corner of Santa Fe. The house itself was old, crumbling at the edges, but it had character. The walls seemed to whisper at night, and the floors creaked underfoot like they were alive. I loved it, but I also felt that strange sense of unease that seemed to settle in the air, like something unseen was always watching. But the views were spectacular, endless stretches of red desert under a sky so wide it felt like it was swallowing me whole. I didn't have much of a routine, but I took daily walks through the desert, wandering through the cacti and sagebrush. The desert was stark, but there was a raw beauty to it. It became my refuge, a place where I could think, where I could feel something other than the grief that had followed me across the country. I'd lost my brother Eli to a car accident 2 years prior. The weight of that loss had made me run not just away from Chicago, but away from myself. New Mexico was supposed to be my healing place, but there was something in the desert that was as broken as I was. One evening, as I walked deeper into the land, I noticed something strange. At first, it was just the usual oddities of the desert: scraps of fur here, dried bones there. But then, I saw something that made me stop in my tracks. A deer, its body lying on the ground in the middle of a clearing. Its skin had been meticulously peeled off, like someone had used a blade to carve it away. But the most unsettling part wasn't the skinned body, it was the way the skin had been folded neatly beside it, as though someone was preparing to come back for it. I stood there for what felt like forever, my mind racing. Could it have been a coyote, some kind of wild animal? But no, this was different. The way the skin had been removed, there was no blood, no mess. It looked surgical, too precise. I told myself it was just a fluke, nature's harshness. But when I returned the next day, I saw more. A rabbit, its fur folded neatly to the side, the skin gone, just like the deer. And then, a few days later, a small coyote. Again, no blood, no signs of struggle, just the skinned remains. People in town had been whispering about it, these strange deaths, they called them. But no one wanted to acknowledge what was really happening. The locals told me not to wander too far, not to go out into the desert at night. They spoke of legends, of old stories, of things that weren't supposed to be real. But it wasn't until the third week that I truly saw it, that I understood. It was late, and I was out walking again, hoping the cool night air would settle my mind. The moon hung low in the sky, casting everything in a pale, ghostly light. I wandered deeper into the desert, past the usual spots, and that's when I saw it. At first it was a shadow, just a dark shape moving in the distance. But as I got closer, my breath caught in my throat. There, standing just inside a cluster of mesquite trees, was a figure. It was tall, unnaturally tall, and it was hunched over, as if the bones inside its body had been rearranged to fit something twisted. Its skin, if you could call it, that was stretched too tight, too thin, like it had been pulled from something else and draped over its bones. Its face was nothing but a mask, a patchwork of skin, stitched together in jagged lines. But what caught me was its eyes, black, endless, hollow. They weren't human eyes. They weren't human eyes. They were wrong. And when it saw me, when it looked at me, I felt a coldness wash over me, deeper than the desert night could ever reach. I couldn't move. My feet were glued to the ground, my mind screaming at me to run, but I couldn't. It didn't step forward, but somehow, I could feel it getting closer, its presence encroaching like a weight on my chest. Then, in a voice that was more like 1,000 voices, all layered together, it whispered, "You shouldn't be here." The sound was enough to break the spell. My body jolted, and before I could think, I was running, stumbling over rocks and cacti, the whispering voices echoing in my head. I didn't stop until I reached my house, slamming the door behind me, gasping for breath. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. The figure, whatever it was, kept coming back to me in dreams, in flashes. Each night, it stood just beyond the reach of my sight, always watching, always waiting. I could still feel its eyes on me, even when I wasn't awake. I reached out to Maria, the older woman who ran the small diner in town. She was one of the few people who wasn't afraid to talk to me, even after I'd been warned away from everyone else. I needed answers, and I had a feeling she knew something. When I arrived at the diner, Maria was sitting at her usual table, a cup of coffee in front of her. She didn't greet me with a smile, but her eyes softened when she saw me. "You've seen it, haven't you?" she asked, her voice low. I nodded, unable to speak. Maria leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It's the skin stealer. It's been here longer than anyone can remember. It wears the skins of the dead, and it hunts those who wander too far into its domain." I stared at her, not understanding. "The skins of the dead? What do you mean?" She took a slow breath, looking around the diner as if making sure no one was listening. "Long ago, the desert was home to something ancient, something powerful. People used to live out here before the land became too dangerous. But the skin stealer never left. It takes the skins of animals, sometimes even people, and wears them like a costume. It's not just a creature. It's a curse, a spirit that feeds on fear, and once it marks you, it doesn't let go." I felt my stomach churn. What do I do? How do I stop it? Maria's eyes were filled with sorrow. "You don't stop it. You can't. The desert has a way of keeping things that it wants. Once you've seen it, it's already too late." I spent the next few days packing up what little I had, trying to leave before the skin stealer found me again. But as the sun set on my last night, I felt those eyes, watching me from the shadows. I could hear it whispering my name, calling me to the desert, to the place where the dead walk. I never made it out. The last thing I remember was the figure standing at the edge of the road, its face stitched together like a grotesque mask, its hollow eyes locking onto mine, and then, I was gone. Now, no one talks about me anymore. The desert keeps its secrets, and the skin stealer wears my face like a prize.